This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, and Marla had said she was starting it. So it has started being recording, and the minutes will be done from the recording. Okay, anything else? I saw someone else pop up. In the yellow shirt, D, did you have something under items not related to the agenda?
No, this is actually my first meeting, so.
Okay, very good. So one of the ways that helps me see who's trying to get our attention is by, in general, people other than the commissioners keeping their video off, and then if somebody is trying to get my attention, turn the video on. So that's generally how we've been doing it. Let's see. So any announcements? Does anyone have anything? Duncan and then Monica.
Yeah, just wanted to give a heads up. We had the third meeting of the Swift and Spear Street intersection committee this afternoon. The consultant came back with the results of the survey, the public survey. They got a lot of good feedback, and they actually developed 3 alternatives for the intersection. At the meeting, we gave them feedback. Justin Rabidou wasn't at the meeting, but is going to get the presentation. He's going to give feedback. The consultants are going to kind of finish it up and then send it out, and certainly all of you folks will see it. Question for you, Jessica. They wanted to know about presenting to us. I told them probably early June, I think, because we have our warned meeting for Article 12 and 10 is end of May, right?
Yes, yeah,
So
that's probably a good time frame if that works for the consultants and the committee. Does that?
Yeah, because the project is supposed to be wrapped up by the end of June, early July. So I thought if we could, if they presented to us maybe our first meeting in June. That makes sense. Delilah wanted to know just to coordinate with Paul, I think.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, we definitely want to hear them. Thanks.
Okay, I will go back to that, and certainly I will get that information out to everybody as soon as I get it back.
Thanks so much, Duncan. Monica?
Yeah, a couple things. I attended the Economic Development Committee discussion last night that I know Jessica will probably talk about. I was interested in what they were going to be talking about regarding the airport, and I just wanted to send kudos out to Jessica. I think she handled what turned out to be, in my opinion, a kind of a unfortunate setting where I, from the agenda, thought we were going to be learning from them some about whatever they've been learning about the airport, and instead it kind of turned into a barrage directed at Jessica about why they haven't been heard yet at the Planning Commission, while obviously we've been a little busy. So Jessica, I just wanted to compliment how you handled that. I thought it was very strong leadership in a very difficult kind of environment. So great people, but thank you for your leadership in that. I thought that was great. Secondly, Paul Engels and I today had the honor of getting a tour of the 1720 Spear Street by a member of the Long family. I was curious to kind of see get my feet on the ground on a spot that we know is kind of giving a test run of our new regs, kind of in their beginning stages. And it was very helpful for me to actually see that. So I was really grateful that they gave me the time, and that was a very helpful thing. So thank you to the Long family, whoever's on today.
Great night. Michael, I saw your hand.
Yeah. Monica's stated the way you handled and I noted that they're expecting the Planning Commission to do huge analytical work, which I think is not our province. It's something that they should do. They want to offload the Commission and expect us to do it. And I think that they might be worthwhile gently them of that. And at the very end, Monica had left already. I did ask them in their deliberations on whatever subject to consider mitigation of climate change.
Ooh, great. Yeah, I probably should have actually done my announcement first. So late last week, Kevin Dorn had reached out to see if I would be available to just attend the Economic Development Committee for one of their discussions. And, you know, I agreed I was available. And so the way the agenda item was written, you know, similar to what Monica said, it made it seem as though it was a discussion and I was going to be participating in it, but mainly about the airport. But they wound up having quite a lot of kind of feedback for us that, you know, I guess some disappointment that we hadn't done more with the airport area in the past, and that we had put it off, as well as had a lot of kind of questions about the, you know, our other work that was ongoing that I wasn't quite prepared to talk about, but I have talked about in the past, so I think I answered their questions. So I wasn't, I didn't volunteer to go or try to go out of, you know, usually if I'm going to talk in front of a committee, I let you know first as a group, but it kind of came up last second. And I actually, like Monica said, I thought I'd be getting more information from them than we got. But related to that, I have received a request from the airport asking for us to take a closer look at some of the areas that they now own that are currently designated as residential along the airport. And I know that we're busy and have been putting off quite a few zoning requests. It was copied to the city council chair who, you know, kind of just asked me and staff if there was a way to potentially move forward some work in that area, kind of in parallel with some of our other work that as a group we're working on. So it came up at the Economic Development Committee level. So I thought I didn't want to leave you in the dark, but I'm working with staff to bring forward an idea at one of our probably next month's meetings to potentially form a subcommittee that has members of our group, but has members from other groups. And I'm proposing a city councilor as well to start looking at some airport related items. So I know it's not on the agenda tonight, so we probably shouldn't talk about it, but I just wanted to let you know that did come up at that other committee. So I didn't want you to kind of not hear about it. And so that'll be, I think, one of our next month's meetings. We'll have a short agenda item on that topic. So I think that's it. Any other announcements? Paul has had his baby, which is very exciting. So congratulations, Paul. I know he's not here for obvious reasons, but it is very exciting. Paul Ingalls, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I'd like to say that I think that field trips like Monica and I went on today should be mandatory for the entire commission, and we should do them at least monthly. There's just nothing like getting out on the land and see what we're actually talking about and not doing it all with words and maps. I was amazed to see that property is, I don't know if you all remember it's the little red house that's between South Point and South Village. And that house has been there since 1836, same family. And I used to buy apples years ago from the old guy, Mr. Long, who owned it then, that generation of Longs. If you remember those apple trees that were next to the house there. So it was a great experience to see the land, and it really enlightened me. I'd have to say, I think it'd be good for all of us to get out on the land in these various places that we're talking about. And I'd be happy to volunteer for the airport.
Thanks for that. And like I said, we'll get back to the airport as part of an official agenda item coming up soon. So I guess we can move on to the big topic for the evening. So we have it called on the agenda presentation and public input forum on the draft environmental protection standard amendments to the LDRs. And I included the word presentation in this agenda item only in so much as if people do have questions and we do need to bring up information. I wanted to make sure that that was kind of covered under the agenda item, but I really do see this as a public input session. You know, we build this with our outreach as a listening session. So I think our main goal here is to hear from the public. I don't think that this is necessarily a forum for us to be doing a lot of debating because we have multiple additional public comment opportunities coming up that I think might be good for us to really kind of hear and listen and collect and read things that we're getting by email before we do a lot of re-deliberation of items. I think that is the most respectful way to proceed. But I do think it might be appropriate if people have some specific questions. And that said, I have invited Taylor Newton from the Regional Planning Commission, who helped do the technical review of the document and has a lot of technical information that he can help us if there's technical questions that come up. So thank you, Taylor, for coming tonight. That's very helpful. So do any other commissioners have anything or questions before we kind of open it up for comment and listening? Bernie and then Monica.
Yeah, just because I was just wondering if we were going to have any ground rules for the public comment. And by that, what I specifically mean is that when we've done this in the past, we haven't had repetitive comments, for lack of a better thing. So if somebody makes a comment and other people agree with it, then they just can say that they agree. But then at least in the past, the goal has been to try to solicit as many different comments as we can, as opposed to repeating the same comment 15 times for an hour. But that's my recollection and suggestion, and obviously we can do what everybody agrees to, but that was my thought.
Yeah, that's a good question, Bernie. In our last meeting, we had multiple people who agreed with things that people had already said, and they actually put those in the chat. I personally found that very helpful. So I don't know, I know Monica was next, but Michael, it looked like you wanted to respond to that directly. Good. Go ahead.
No, I had a question about the written submissions that we've received for this evening. Do those need to be read so that all those attending know what's in them, what people have said?
I guess what I was thinking with the written comment, so we've been getting some things by email. What we've done in the past was to kind of collect all those up. It's a different format for collecting comments. And we hadn't previously read them all out loud at a meeting, but they were recorded separately. Marla, do you want to address that?
What we do for the Development Review Board, and you may wish to adopt this, is if you get written comments, I can post them to the packet page tomorrow. I can assemble them and just post them as supplemental, or call them supplemental or handouts or something.
Okay, and
I have great data on that to share. Just this one page that we have dedicated to the environmental protection standards is so excellent. It would be great if under the we have the connections to all the meetings. Can we just post a link there that will keep track of all comments, all letters, the comments that come in from tonight? That might be, because we're going to have multiple sessions and the public hearing, so it might be really helpful to kind of have it all in one file, just to something to think about. But something on that page I think would be really helpful, because everything is there. And then I
Yeah.
did have another question about process.
Yeah, because Marla, you know, our public input collection period goes all the way till the 20th of next month. So there's a few more weeks before we kind of get to the end of that period. So it is a good question. I mean, maybe collecting them so they're available there, and then, you know, so they're all together at the end of the May 20th. Michael?
Maybe they should be or could be included with the next packet, which is May, with the packet, May 4th and May 20th, is it? So that they'll be seen in with.
Okay, that's I think that actually was what Marla's idea was, wasn't it?
I know, but that sounds like a good idea as well. I guess I wonder, you know, the minutes are where the verbal comments will show up. So I guess if we do include a link on the project webpage to written public comments, we should also include a link to that says something like additional public comments can be found in the minutes for such and such a date, and a link to the minutes. Would that be a way to sort of make sure everything's given equal weight? I wouldn't want written comments to be perceived as more impactful than verbal ones.
Yeah, I agree, because we'll have 3 verbal sessions. So today, May 4 and May 20.
Right.
Okay.
So I just had one process question. I do have a specific question that came from an earlier meeting that would be directed at Taylor, and it would be, you know, so whenever the time is right, if I can basically ask this other person's question that Taylor can answer, is that appropriate?
Sure. Any other process questions? And then maybe we can kick it off with Monica's question she got from someone else. Okay, then maybe we'll go with Monica's question, and then we'll open up for input, if that makes sense.
Okay, and this is just kind of a random question that probably, Jessica, you're going to have an answer to as well, but it was simply a question of, can farming happen on wetlands, class 3 wetlands? Where's the, which is the priority in the state?
So first off, I'm going to assume that the farming that we're talking about is farming that is large enough to meet the agricultural exemption and be under the jurisdiction of the accepted agricultural practices in the state. So that's the first big assumption. If it's really small, that's a more complicated discussion, but we're going to assume really large. I don't know the accepted agricultural practices well, because it's outside the jurisdiction of zoning. But that is a question that I could pretty quickly look up the answer to and get back to you tomorrow or later this week. But I think I'm not going to speculate. Let me find you an answer. I don't know the answer to it off the top of my head.
Thanks, Taylor. And I think, you know, maybe that's something, because I think you were going to attend the next one too, one of our future listening sessions. So maybe you could just get back to us at that time.
Okay, I can do that.
Okay, anything else from commissioners before I open up for public comment? Okay, does anyone want to, any public want to weigh in or have questions for us on the draft land development regulations? Lonnie Raven, go ahead.
Lonnie Raven, thank you. So I'm representing the University of Vermont right now, and we've been listening to these sessions for a while. And the university has several large parcels in South Burlington that are either 100% or close to 100% covered by habitat blocks. So, you know, there are concerns. So on the one hand, UVM recognizes that it wants to be a good steward of its land and its host and in the city of South Burlington for the benefit of the city and the university. And we've tried to respect this interest in South Burlington and elsewhere also. We also have a responsibility to be a good steward of the university's assets, including its land, for the benefit of the financial health of the institution. So the environmental protection standards, as currently drafted, raise some questions. They do not adequately recognize the unique nature of UVM parcels or provide, we think they may not provide, reasonable protection for UVM's reasonable expectations for its ability to use those parcels as outlined in the campus master plan, which come to you with information about that over many years. So we can get more specific a little bit later, but we're anxious to work with the city to find the appropriate balance between the city's desire to preserve natural resources and UVM's need to protect the usefulness and value of its land. So I'd welcome more discussion. I don't want to take up too much time right now because this is specific to UVM, but I would welcome any kind of discussion or clarification about how this would affect UVM land. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Lonnie. I think that that is a good point. Your zoning district is different in how it works than a lot of the other zoning districts. So.
Jessica, we lost your audio.
Thank you, Bernie. I was just looking at the chat to make sure we didn't get too far away from those comments. So Sarah Dopp and Carol and Ellen Long kind of confirmed the ownership of that long parcel that Monica and Paul brought up. And then Roseanne asked a really good question that I should have just said up front. Yes, if someone has sent in written or emailed questions or comments, you do not need to reiterate them during the listening sessions. That is correct. This is, although this is a good time if there are technical questions, I think it might be easier to answer a technical question kind of in this forum and with Taylor here. So if there was something that got emailed that was kind of a technical question that you didn't already get an answer to, this would be a good time to reiterate that piece. But any comments we've already distributed within the commissioners, and we will be collecting them and posting them as per what we talked about. Okay, anyone else?
Yeah, if I may, I'm not sure what the right process is, but we currently live here in Butler Farms, and we just heard about this just recently, so we haven't really been able to have a big chance to really look at the document. We were a little bit alarmed, and I just wanted to see if at least we can high level touch base on some of the, I guess, floodplain and all the overlay district portion, and how that's going to really affect people that are next to like a brook that goes around like Butler Farms specifically here right now. And from my understanding of the document, it seems like it's going from I guess from 100 meters to 200 meters, and that's really right up to my property. I just want to get a high level, make sure that I'm understanding what is the drive, I guess, for this motion. Why would the water or the floodplain change or foreseeable future change? And is it, I guess, my understanding that we're going to be extremely limited to a lot of items to do in our property, from if we wanted to put a shed or a little greenhouse or something like that, that's going to add a lot more complexity besides other possible insurance issues that we might face due to this new designation of a floodplain. I just want to get it, something, somebody to really explain to me what's going on. I didn't get a good understanding from this document at this point. So I'm hoping that is something that we can spend 5 minutes on.
Yeah, sure. And just, can you say your name for the record? It's
Juan Jimenez.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So I think that Taylor, I might call on you to help on this one because it is complicated. One thing that I think is important to note is that the 500-year floodplain already does exist. It has been designated by FEMA as that 500-year or 0.02% chance floodplain. So it's not new, but new in kind of mapping or federal terms. But what is new is that we haven't previously included it in our local city regulations. So that piece is new. And, a lot of the things that we talked about are actually to, protect your investments is a big piece of it. If someone doesn't realize that they're even in a potential flood area, you may make investments on your property that could be damaged. So that's one piece of it. We also want to make sure that we don't have new homes that could have that same kind of flood risk. We've seen other communities have many neighborhoods and homes washed away or damaged significantly in these zones because they weren't planned well. So those were a few of the things that we talked about. And then maybe Taylor, if you can talk about just some of the restrictions specifically.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to get there on the map. So we're talking about 500-year floodplain in Butler Farms. We're talking about what's considered a B1 500-year floodplain. So let me just get to that section of the bylaw real quick.
And maybe, I don't know if showing the map would be helpful for Juan to see it, Jessica.
That'll be actually great. I tried going to one of the maps and I had a very hard time really getting the outline. It seemed like even from the map, it seemed like from the little brook behind my property, it really kind of encroached right down to my deck to it. But I just want to make sure that my perspective is the correct one.
Yeah.
If someone could drive the map while
I'll work on the map.
Thank you, Jessica. So if we're talking about a B1 500-year floodplain, we're talking about a floodplain that, as Jessica mentioned, has not previously been regulated by the city and is proposed to be regulated by the city. But with a 500-year floodplain in South Burlington, what the Planning Commission is proposing is that the B1 area be less heavily regulated than the B2 area of the 500-year floodplain. The rationale being that the B1 area is already substantially developed. And it's an area that we want to be careful about new development, but we don't want to prohibit new development. Whereas with the B2 500-year floodplain, those are areas that currently are not developed and that we want to continue to protect and prohibit future development there. I'm not going to go through this in detail because the list is very long, but I first off want to note that on page 10 of the draft LDR documents available on South Burlington's website, page 10 has a list of exempted development. There's a whole list of development that can occur in this B1 area that does not need a permit from the city. Maintenance of existing structures is one of those things. In terms of new development in the B1 area, the new accessory structures are potentially permittable in the B1 area. You just couldn't do new principal structures and new accessory structures are both allowed in the the 500-year floodplain B1 area. There are some other prohibitions, but that mostly deals with much larger scale development than you would see in a Butler Farms. In terms of the standards that any new accessory structure, like a shed, would have to meet, there would be a pretty comparable process to what already exists, and that would just be a zoning permit. And the answer to that question there is actually on page 13 and page 14 of the document. As long as the accessory structure, like a shed or a deck, is less than 500 square feet in size and is located in the 500-year floodplain B1 area, just a zoning permit would be required. That's issued by the zoning administrator, not a full DRB review. There are some standards that would need to be met in terms of flood proofing of the actual structure. We would want to make sure that the structure is made out of materials that are generally flood resistant, and that it's situated on the lot in a place that isn't immediately adjacent to the creek and is relatively safe from flooding. But on the whole, the regulations for this area that we're talking about are fairly light compared to other parts of the floodplain.
Well, thank you for that clarification. Yeah, because I had read the document briefly, and on some location it sounded like I had needed to be kind of waterproofing even my basement, but maybe that was by misunderstanding of the whole document, I guess. But this clarifies a little bit, and makes me I feel better about this proposal, I guess, now with that explanation. Thank you.
Great. So Roseanne in the chat had a follow-up about the questions. Roseanne, if you have questions, it might be helpful for you to actually ask them verbally. It's hard for me to go back through the emails during the meeting, if that's okay. Because like I said, we're not doing a lot of back and forth, but we did invite Taylor to help with some technical questions. We want to make sure that people are understanding. Any other comments or questions?
Hi, my name is Craig Thrall. I live actually a few doors down from Juan. And I had another question about some of the zoning restrictions based in the B1 area. I see in the doc, thanks very much for pointing us at that, Taylor. That definitely helps. In page 16, section H, basements for all new construction and substantial improvements. It says fully enclosed areas below grade on all sides, including below grade crawl spaces and basements, shall be prohibited. So question one, what defines a substantial improvement?
Good question. It is defined in the document. Just so you know, but I can summarize real quick here. Substantial improvement is a FEMA definition. It comes from the National Flood Insurance Program. It's a definition that the city is required to adopt to be a participant in the National Flood Insurance Program. That's important because being a member of the National Flood Insurance Program allows property owners in South Burlington to be able to purchase flood insurance. Substantial improvement essentially means an improvement to a structure that is greater than 50% of the value of the structure. That said, I want to go back and check that definition real quick because I think we may have made a little bit of a change for the B1 area and up that value from 50% a little higher. So give me a second to look up that answer real quick.
Cool. And I think my next question would be about the fully enclosed areas. What that defines.
Taylor, real quick, I think we did go up to 75%. I'm pretty sure that language was in there. So we did, I'm pretty sure we did bump that up. I don't know if any of the commissioners have thoughts on that, but I'm pretty sure we did.
Yeah.
You are correct, Duncan. You are correct. I just went and checked that in the definition. We did bump it up to 75% for both B1 and B2 areas, actually. So the entire 500-year floodplain, we went to 75%. And so, Craig, your question was about what essentially what a basement is, correct?
What a fully enclosed area below grade. I asked because we have a basement that's unfinished and it's just one big space, and we were hoping to kind of finish it and have maybe have a room with a door or something. But now that I'm seeing the fully enclosed areas, I'm just curious about
that. Yes. Give me 2 seconds on that real quick. So it's back to that language there on page 16. For it's specific to new construction and substantial improvement, but there can't be any basements. And sorry, let me address your fully enclosed space question first. Essentially what we're talking about there is anything that has a door to it that is below grade. That is not a very good answer to this question, but that's the best I can verbalize it. There is, it's a lot easier to explain when looking at pictures. And so let's say, Marla Keene, the DRB planner in South Burlington, had a question about whether or not something constituted a basement. What I would tell her to do, and what I would advise her to do, would be to look at a technical bulletin released by FEMA on basements. That technical bulletin, you should be able to Google it and find it online as well. That technical bulletin walks through a bunch of different scenarios and essentially defines what is and what is not a basement. What is and what is not a fully enclosed space. And I would advise Marla to use that document to determine whether or not an application involved a fully enclosed space. In your circumstance, Craig, the rules would allow you to theoretically finish your basement, provided that the basement finishing was not a substantial improvement. So if you are in the B1 area, you would just need to make sure that you don't spend more than 75% of the value of your existing structure on your basement finish. Upon application for you to do your basement finishing, you would have to provide some cost estimates to Marla, showing that you're doing a non-substantial improvement. But it would just be a zoning permit, and as long as it was non-substantial, you would be allowed to finish your basement.
Awesome. That's great. So for my takeaway from tonight is I had the same question as Juan with respect to, say, a shed, an accessory building, and it sounds like the normal permitting and zoning applies. There might be some special stuff around materials, but I'd submit a permit and then get it recommendations, or I guess feedback on the permit, and the same applies for the basement. Okay, I think you answered my questions. Also, just quick second to say thank you for this committee. There's obviously a lot of thought and work that goes into the environmental protection standards that have been drafted here. That's one of the reasons we chose to live in South Burlington. So thanks for doing that, and thanks for your time. Thank you,
Craig. And thanks, Taylor, for helping with the questions. Andrew Chanak, I'd seen you pop up. Were you, I think, so that means you're next if you.
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. So you can help guide me here, but does it make sense to talk a little bit about the email exchange that you and I had to try and come up with some map which shows the incremental areas? And I mean, if you think we don't need to talk about that here, then
No, it's actually a good point. So I had it on my list to make sure to bring it up at least before the end of this section, and we moved on to the next agenda item. But I mean, we can talk about it now. That's fine.
So I mean, right. So from my perspective, you know, I feel that at least for me, it's kind of difficult to really comment because I just can't really tell where the new acres are, and without having a hand on that, honestly, it's not clear to me that there are 974 acres, but I'll accept that there are, but I just can't figure out where they are. And so I thought it'd be really helpful, and I'll just kind of give my 2 cents as to what would help me to like start with a base map which shows everything new, and then just start subtracting from that everything current. So subtract NRP, subtract all the existing, you know, rivers and streams and buffers, and then subtract all the parks and other conserved lands, and then I think subtract all the wetlands that are mapped and the existing buffers, because there's no new wetlands, right? So it's not like you can actually, I mean, you have to delineate wetlands, so not like mapping could add or subtract any wetlands, and then that would give like a pretty good picture of what, you know, what's new, and that would help me a lot. And so that was my comment.
Okay, great. We had also kind of bantered by email about how we could improve the current interactive mapping to be able to show those areas better. What I see is missing in the interactive map is you know, the parks, conserved lands, and the NRP areas, which have protections and are in some of the static maps that we showed at the joint meeting with the City Council. But it does, you know, cost us a little bit of money I didn't want to make the request on behalf of the Planning Commission before having a discussion with the group about how to improve the mapping. But I guess what I was thinking is if we could put those areas that were blocked off as green on the slideshows that we've gone through with the City Council, and make sure that everything's layered properly. You know, I think one of the problems with our static slideshow map was that the NRP land, although it was shown in green, it was like underneath. So you couldn't see, like it needs to be on top of the blue, which is the new areas, in order to really see where the blue kind of extends beyond the NRP area. So I think that was one of the issues. And then the fact that those layers aren't in the interactive map, so you can't kind of do that toggling on and off and zooming and really seeing the property lines. So I guess my thought based on those emails and the comments we had kind of during that joint meeting was if we could get those additional layers into the interactive map, and make sure they're layered properly, that might allow people to kind of really zoom around and really see those areas where the new extends beyond the existing protections. Is that
would do it for me. Thanks, Jessica.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. And then in the chat, Roseanne, a clear map will help me too. Oh, and there's Roseanne. Did you want to add to that?
Yes,
Roseanne?
I would. Yeah, and I don't think this should cost much money at all. And I understand what Andrew is asking. That might satisfy Andrew. But I think for those of us who are not as sophisticated with overlays and toggling and stuff, just a map of the city in a large enough scale and just trace with a magic marker around the newly added areas. One, that would clearly show the 974 acres. If you knew which parcel had which acres, that would be great. But that would show it. You know, you're one of the elements that sounds so wonderful is that you've added close to 1,000 new acres. So all I would like to see is where are those 1,000 acres? I don't need to see where, I mean, I'd like to see what the other protections were, especially if you took any protections away. And I'm going to get to that in a second. But initially going in the front page article on the other paper said you're protecting all these acres. Very simple. Just trace around the new acres, and that can't cost very much money except the price of a paper map and a and a magic marker. But anyway, so the other thing that I would like to see, and going to and we've exchanged some emails about this, and going to Monica's map training course, it clearly is evident now that there are protections that once existed, well, that currently exist, that are being taken away. I'd like to see another map with that. Hopefully that would be a few, not very much, I hope, but that would be very clear. If you took any protections away, then show that. So those are the two maps that I think would go a super long way to show all the new stuff you've protected and the stuff that you have now taken protections away. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else on mapping, Monica?
When can we expect that? I mean, is that something you could do? Is that doable?
This is what we're talking about. I don't just unilaterally decide what we do.
Okay.
That was the point. Yeah.
Okay.
Monica and then Alan.
Well, so I don't know if it's necessary, but I did make without getting into public meeting issues, I did say that I would clarify something in an email that Roseanne sent to all of us, which is a public document. I've since worked to clarify that with Roseanne. It does point to something that she's talking about. Would you like me to clarify that now? I don't want to interfere with hearing from the public.
Sure. Yeah, it was about, I think it was about a kind of misunderstanding during the mapping session.
Well,
kind of maybe
yes,
a
but it does relate to what Roseanne is saying, and I think in one of the sets of maps that Paul has created, which is on our environmental protection page on the site, he overlaid the new protected areas with the comp plan maps as an example. And you can see on one of those that there are some blue hatched areas that the map refers to as riparian connectors, which are not within the new Article 10 and 12 map. And that, I think, is creating the comment that Roseanne made, that the new maps are perhaps then not protecting everything that was protected. And what my comment was in the meeting, which we've all discussed, is that our maps for 10 and 12 do their best at mapping wetlands. But the reality is that the regulations now require field delineation of wetlands. And the reality is that once those wetlands are actually field delineated, whereas now it's a preference, but we're now requiring it with the new, that the line for the wetlands may actually go beyond what our Articles 10 and 12 maps are showing. And there's a chance that if that wetland mapping delineation does go beyond it, it may cross into what the comp plan map 8 is calling a riparian area. And so that was what I was trying to communicate, that the field delineation itself is what will ultimately be the true pinned area. And it may go into that riparian area, which may appear that it's otherwise not protected. And separate from that, what I didn't explain in the mapping is that there are things within the PUD process, the conservation PUD, which would address some of those elements as well. And I don't know when, if it's necessary to get into that now, but I think, Jessica, I think I summarized that as well to you. So not sure how I should, or if I should bring that up now.
I think that was good. Alan Strong, did you have a comment?
I did, and Monica, that was a perfect lead in. I was just kind of curious when you were talking about some of the things, some of the changes that you might make, or different ways to visualize the new regulations. In response to Andrew's questions and comments, I think it would be nice to actually say what percentage of the new areas that are protected actually are wetlands. And you know, I know wetlands overlap a lot with the habitat block, so maybe wetlands outside of habitat block, so you can sort of see what is going to, in the future, require field delineation. And as Monica said, that could be more, but it also could be less.
Yeah, I think that that's a good question, because you're right. A lot, if you look at the list of the other resources, they're more of a static line, but the wetlands do create that kind of uncertainty. I'll see if that's something that, well, I guess if the group agrees. So what I wrote down so far was update the interactive map to put on the green blocks, which would be the parks, conserved areas of various types, and the NRP in the interactive map, and then creation of a static map that tries to highlight the newly protected areas in some way. Just that, and then what Alan just suggested, which is what percent of the area are only wetlands, so don't overlap with a different type of protection. It would give us a better feel for the uncertainty. So those were kind of the three things that I wrote down here. Paul Engels, and then Michael, and then Monica, if that's.
Also a map, or as part of the map of what we have added is what we've removed also.
Yeah, so what we've removed, I think the best and only way we can really show that is in the overlay with the comp plan maps that we have in the slideshow that we went through with the city council. And the reason I say that is because the data sources of that information on those maps 7 and 8 from the comp plan aren't clear. So we would be making some guesses as to like what information was used to even create those maps. So I think we do have that in that form, which is more of a static type map in that.
Okay.
So then I said Monica, or I said Michael, and then Monica.
Yeah, I just wanted to understand clearly, I think what Andrew Chalnick was asking, we're looking for an interactive map where we can either peel away each layer until we get to what's new, or going the other way, start with what's new and keep adding back what was there before.
I'd be happy with a static map that shows the same thing. Just start with the new, and then just peel back all the old. And I mean, whether interactive would be great, but just a map which shows just what's new.
I think what I said does that. Okay, anything else on the mapping? Does that seem like a good list to make the request to the Regional Planning Commission? I forgot Monica was next before
I think that for specifically Articles 10 and 12, the map that is called the current and draft environmental standards map that is highlighted on the page, the interactive map, that is what it's doing. It's the yellow and the blue. The yellow is the old and the blue is the new. So that's there. If it's a matter of understanding it's only 2 colors to look at. Well, there's 2 different shades of blue, a few shades of blue, and you can turn things on and off there. It's not to Andrews. It's not to Andrew's comment. It's to Roseanne's comment about the old versus the new of Articles 12 and 10. So at least that one seems that it is already there. And maybe if that, and I'm looking at it right now, I don't know if it's worth pulling that up to show Roseanne to see if that is what she's looking for, because I do think that that's already, that is here.
No, I wouldn't be asking the question if I could read the map. There are multiple colors on that map. You just said there's 2 shades of blue on the map. So I went to it. I went to your session. I looked at the maps. There are multiple colors. It's not, one of the blues are the parks, which is why I thought you were adding the acreage of the parks because it was blue. So,
So it sounds like there's the by the numbers page.
Yes, I've got the yes.
I know. I'm directing this to Jessica. Sorry, I'm not trying to bypass you. I'm trying to. I think that maybe there's a disconnect between the by the numbers page that Paul added to the site versus the maps. There's the by the numbers page that the region helped us come up with that is not pointing to a specific map, and maybe that would be helpful.
Pardon? The map. We have too many colors on these maps.
Yeah, Ted, I hear you and I agree with you.
Okay, so I will attempt to get a map made that's a static map as you're describing, if the group agrees. Do I see some agreement that I should ask for some additional mapping here? Okay, I'm seeing enough thumbs up to go with that. Okay, so any additional comments or input? We have Alan Long.
Hi, I've been waiting for the perfect moment to jump in here. I don't know whether there is such a thing, but
this is the perfect moment.
Okay, so I want to start by thanking Monica and Paul for taking the time to go over and take a look at our property. For those of you who aren't quite as familiar, we are landowners, my brother and sisters and significant others, landowners on Spear Street of about 39 acres. It's 2 plots that we're planning to develop as one traditional neighborhood development if we can get past these new regulations. Of the 39 acres, 22 of them were already conserved by the NRP statute. It looks as if the habitat block concept will take another 6 or 7 acres out of development. And my concern today is about wetlands, because we do have some wetlands on the property, and it looks as if there are some places, Paul and Monica are probably still drying their feet, that will influence what we can do with the property also. So my specific concern is about your intention to increase the buffer around Class 2 wetlands from 50 feet to 100 feet. I want to talk about it first, generally, and then secondly, specifically as related to our proposed project. On the general plane, I think it's too bad that while this idea would provide probably better habitat and better water quality, and I'm sure there are people who think that even 100 feet isn't enough to protect wetlands. We're concerned about it because some people have been quoting this figure of 940 acres already taken out of development potential for conservation purposes. We're in favor of conservation too, but I think it's really important for the commission to try to come to a balance here. There is a need for housing also, which was made very cogently by the Housing Working Group, and I know the Affordable Housing Committee is after this same goal. I saw a study recently by UVM that said that there was a decrease in the number of citizens in Vermont under the age of 45 between 2018 and 19 or 2019 and 20 of 55,000 people. It sounds like a sort of a youth flight out of Vermont. Vermont is also, according to that study, the third oldest average population in the country, after only Maine and New Hampshire. And that's a concern. I think that, you know, the Affordable Housing Committee has made a good case for the need for affordability, for an opportunity for young people to be able to rent and then buy and stay in Vermont. We need that vitality. We can't just all grow old. You know, maybe I should move back. I'd fit right in, I guess. But so that's a very general concern. I think that adding an additional buffer like that is going to take some more land out of developable property, which is not good for the city since it's already conserving so much. It's also worth pointing out that there's a double standard being suggested with this buffer. The city center buffer would only be 50 feet, but other parts of the city, including the southeast quadrant and residential units, would be 100 feet. That doesn't seem quite right, because I don't understand why a house would be worse close to a wetland than a commercial building would be. That's another point. It's also worth pointing out, probably the commission already knows this, South Burlington would be the only municipality in Chittenden County with a wider buffer than the state guideline of 50 feet. So all of those things are general considerations. There's a specific consideration that Monica and Paul may have waded in today, specifically for our property and our proposed project. There are a couple of wetland fingers from the Class 2 wetland way behind our proposed development over in the Great Swamp area. These fingers are only probably 50 feet wide, but the proposal in the new LDRs would be to add a 100-foot buffer on each side of these fingers. That makes a 250-foot wide swath that wouldn't be developable. And, you know, I'm concerned about this. Our family's concerned about it. Sort of selfishly, because it's going to, if that goes through, it's going to put a big hole in our sketch plan. We're going to have to go back to the drawing board. Probably wouldn't be able to build as many units, which I imagine some people would rejoice at, but we're trying to maintain the value of our property and exercise our rights as landowners. And so I guess I'll finish by saying that I will write all of this up for you folks. I probably need to do a little more research on wetland buffers, but this is our concern, and I plead on behalf of my family for some balance from the commission in thinking about this buffer.
Great, thanks, Alan. Anyone else who wants to provide comment or questions? If anyone has anything, you can unmute or turn your video on. Sarah, Dot?
Yeah, hi. One topic that hasn't come up so far this evening is the matter of grasslands, which don't seem to be adequately addressed so far. I know that Alan at least has submitted some stuff about bird populations that are affected, but you know, some of us that are in the more rural area of the city appreciate some of the open fields, not just for the views, but for the wildlife that live there, including maybe especially birds. So it seems as though this ought to be addressed in the new regs specifically. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Anything else? Monica?
This is a process question, Jessica. These are listening sessions, and then we go into the open hearing. And we don't have a scheduled time to discuss things such as providing Sarah with clarification on that. So when would that, it's clear what this draft has done. When do we discuss that?
I mean,
after the open hearing?
Yeah, I think immediately after. I mean, I think what we talked about was making sure we had kind of given everyone enough time to understand the draft, get our questions. I think if we start making changes, say tonight, it's kind of not fair to the process. So, you know, we've often started that session kind of immediately following the closing of the public hearing. So, you know, whatever time is left on the agenda after the public's finished with comments the night of the hearing, you know, we can start to dive into, you know, that discussion.
Just to be clear, I wasn't talking about making suggested changes to the draft. I was talking about Sarah's made a comment, and when do we provide an answer to her about how this draft handles specifically that resource, as an example, so that she can then look to a particular area or something and ask a follow-up question.
Sure. Well, she was asking for them to be protected as a separate protection, which is not in the draft. So I guess we could say that now. I mean, it isn't in the draft. What we have talked about a little bit is that you know, some of that type of habitat is within the buffer areas around our water resources. So although it's not protected as a separate resource, there are some areas of that kind of land cover designation that do have other protections, you know, either in the buffers. You know, when we looked at the mapping, you know, there weren't that many areas that were color coded on the comp plan maps as grasslands. But, you know, at least 2 of them were in areas that had conservation type, you know, some, I don't know, protection. So there are some, you know, at least according to that comp plan map overlay, that did have some protections, but it is true they aren't a separate resource. We also talked about, Michael had made the suggestion, and we had added it into the draft, that the grasslands would be considered one of the priority resources for when you add additional resource land in the PUD process. You know, to get to that 70% for a conservation PUD, the grasslands and agricultural lands would count and be prioritized in that list. So those were the areas where, you know, although they're not a separate resource, there is some consideration. So I guess that makes sense to say that now. And I know, Sarah, that may not completely address what you're talking about, because you're right, it's not a separate section in chapter 12. So yeah, go ahead.
I certainly concede your point that there are examples of this in the city that have overlapping other protections. I certainly concede that. The one big one that I remember seeing on the map, though, is a fairly large open field up near the interstate. It's in the tech, well, not in the tech park, but west of it, I guess you'd say, in the industrial zone. There's a big block on one of the maps that I looked at that seems to be the major one that's actually designated on an older map as grassland. I don't know the total acreage of that, but I'm not sure that that would enjoy so much of the overlapping protections around the edges as you're referring to. So
Yeah,
that was my example.
Yeah, and part of the, this did come up at one of the previous meetings when we were looking at the maps, and I know one of the comments was that for the southeast quadrant, chapter 9 would give some protection to grasslands, if you use that comp plan map. But that meadow or grassland that you're talking about is not in the chapter 9 area, so it wouldn't currently have protection. But so I don't know, maybe there's a way, and it's kind of a funny zoning district up there because it's the industrial open space.
Right.
Maybe there's a way for us to look at how the open space is designated on those parcels. So, if that is a specific area that, that grassland exists and it is an open industrial open space district, I mean, maybe there's something we could target specifically within that district.
Yeah, I mean, my comments may not be limited to that one, but that was a bigger, more prominent example than others that I thought of.
Yeah, great. Michael?
Yes, there is one other grassland that I see marked on the map. It's on the south side of Allen Road. If you look at that map.
I think that's the one that was it's an association land. It's owned in partnership with, I thought we had talked about that one, having protections because it was collectively owned by the neighborhood. I might be wrong about the one you're talking about.
I thought it was owned by, was a Larkin property.
Yeah, we can take a look. Maybe I'm thinking of a different piece, but other comments from anyone? I'm seeing a few things in the chat here. So starting at the 7:53 p.m. timestamp, referring back to the riparian areas, the state does not, so a few things. My question and concern is about the riparian areas, not the wetlands. Still need an answer. Where protections are taken away from riparian areas? Unlike wetlands, the state does not require field work on riparian areas. So one of the things, and Taylor, you could jump in here, our riparian buffers do have some field delineation associated with them because they're actually mapped. An applicant would need to field delineate the top of bank of the stream or the top of slope, and then that is the starting point for which the buffer width is measured. So there is a field delineation portion. So it is actually wider than it's shown on any of our interactive mapping because our maps use a middle of river line that then starts that buffer. Does that description make sense to you, Taylor?
Yeah, I want to add one other point of clarification. So what's being proposed now is essentially the combination of river corridor and the mapped river corridor, which is mapped by the Agency of Natural Resources, and South Burlington's existing riparian buffer into essentially one regulatory space instead of two. And so for those, for the Winooski River, for most of Muddy Brook, most of Potash Brook, there is a drainage area of over 2 square miles in size. And therefore, the Vermont Agency of Natural Resources has actually mapped a physical space based on the topographical conditions on those rivers, and you know, map the spaces that are essentially prone to erosion that should be protected from all future development. That river corridor space in those areas generally aligns with your riparian buffers, but in some places it might be a little bit more protective, in some places it might be a little bit less protective. Doesn't totally align, but just know that's one small change. As Jessica explained, on the remainder of the rivers and streams, perennials, I should say, we're talking about a 50-foot buffer from top of bank, top of slope. That is wider than what's shown on the map because field delineation is required. On Potash Brook, we're talking about a 100-foot setback from top of bank, top of slope. And then from intermittent streams, we're talking about a 10-foot setback, which does align with the existing standard in South Burlington.
Thank you. And then Andrew Chalnick had said the state defines riparian areas as a buffer measured from the outer edge of the valley bottom or river, whichever is wider. So this is specific to the riparian corridor as used in the BioFinder, is I think what Andrew's talking about there. And then Roseanne, so she sent an email already, but she wanted to reiterate the request to protect agricultural lands. And we do have that emailed kind of comment with a lot more information associated with it as well. Sandy Dooley, this is secondhand information. A member of the Open Space Committee stated this morning that Alan Strong, who is here, the chair of the Open Space Committee, stated that based on the technical definitions of grasslands, there are no grasslands in Vermont. Would Alan please speak to whether I was told this correctly? So, Alan, I don't know if you're still here, but it sounds like there was a debate about grasslands in a different committee. I don't know if you want to address that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the simple answer to that question is that is incorrect. If you want to get into a lot of complicated issues about native grasslands versus cool season grasses that are grown for agriculture, I'd be happy to do that, but it may not be worth the time right now.
So it sounds like that statement in the chat there was incorrect, and there are some grasslands in Vermont, is I guess what I'm getting out of that.
Around, yeah, I think it's hundreds of thousands of acres, actually. I mean, we have a lot of grasslands in Vermont.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. So we got to the grasslands, and I'm sorry, we're kind of moving through these comments a little slower than our discussion. Roseanne Greco, are our brooks considered rivers? And the answer is yes. We also do include an intermittent stream with a buffer as well. So yes, the name of the river doesn't designate how it's considered. It's the physical characteristics of whether it's a perennial stream or an intermittent stream. What is not included is a kind of ditch that's clearly a non-natural, more like a stormwater conveyance. And then what my, yeah.
Can I just make sure that we are hearing Andrew's comment at 7:55?
Did I miss one?
No, you read it, but I just want to make sure that we are hearing.
Sure, no, I can address that. I would just, so, I mean, as Jessica probably knows better than I, yeah, the state biofinder defines a riparian area. That riparian area is what was used to, I think, draw up map 8, which refer to riparian areas, riparian connectivity. And just to really, Monica, go to the point you were making, I mean, it may or may not include wetlands. So delineating wetlands doesn't really, doesn't address the fact that the regs, draft regs don't, completely align with the state definition, because they're two different areas. And that's the only point I was trying to make.
So just to be clear, and Jessica, this is another instance where I think making clarity so that people can add to their comments if they want. The decision for Articles 12 and 10, the reason that when you overlay those on the comp plan maps and you see some of the blue hatched with the comp plan's riparian area not being covered is because Articles 10 and 12 do not list riparian as a resource. I'm kind of asking and I'm saying and asking. It does not say riparian, and that's why that is not there. And I think part of our discussion was that riparian, we don't know, do we know the source of the riparian as it was listed in that comp plan map? So Jessica, I don't know if you can offer clarity to this. I'm trying to just make sure.
I can tell you that it's exactly maps with the state mapping.
Yes. So what we did was we went through a process and included some of the state biologists that kind of created that riparian connectivity layer. And one of the things about that particular layer, it is used in Biofinder, it is a statewide layer, and it's not very specific to the land that we have and the kind of more detailed on the ground scenario we have here in the city. So when we looked at that, probably 2 years ago at this point, we decided that we wanted to have like a better, more scientific definition of the function of that riparian connectivity layer. So instead of using that jaggedy, coarse state layer, we looked at what goals it was trying to accomplish with protection of our water resources. The comp plan specifically refers to using that layer in addressing habitat connectivity and habitat values. So, instead of using that state kind of coarse layer, we went through the process of making sure that we were protecting our water resources specifically with the buffers, the river corridor, the floodplains, adding in the 500-year floodplain to get kind of the areas right along the rivers. And then kind of really looking at where the most important habitat was, and which led to the Arrowwood study to really identify the areas where here on the ground, specifically in South Burlington, we had those larger areas of habitat value. And then to make sure we were getting all of that connectivity, we added in the habitat connectivity or connectors or connections. So I know, and we all know, those layers aren't perfectly aligned in all areas, but I guess I would kind of direct all of us back to the goal of kind of why was that put onto that map in the comp plan in the first place, and are the areas that we're designating kind of meeting those goals. So I guess that's how I think of it. And, we use directions specifically from Jens Hilke, the biologist that really came up with that Biofinder area and method and the conservation method there that goes along with it. And, you know, I think his direction really pushed us to, you know, if we had the resources here in South Burlington to invest in figuring out where those areas are most important, to do that. And that's kind of why we went with the approach of the habitat block. So although the layers aren't perfectly aligned, I do think we're doing a nice job of kind of finding those bigger areas where the habitat exists. So I mean, I think it's an ongoing discussion, and you know, we can go through the public comment period and think back on these issues. So I mean, what's in the draft doesn't need to be the end product. I mean, that's why we're doing these listening sessions and getting public comment. But that is kind of how we kind of got there and why the maps aren't perfectly aligned. So I guess to answer that question. Let's see. Okay, it looks like we have. So Roseanne Greco, back to the comments in the chat. Does the time of year make a difference in field delineation? It's much wetter during some times of the year than others. For both the stream edge, river edge designation, as well as the wetland designation, it does not matter based on the wetness, but it does matter that you can identify the vegetation in the case of the wetlands, and you're just not allowed to do a wetland delineation in Vermont outside of the growing season because you need to be able to identify the vegetation. Does that answer the question, Roseanne? You know, I guess the answer is it won't change the line, no. But there are sometimes you can't do the wetland delineation.
Yes, it answers it. Thank you.
Let's see. Sandy Dooley, this actually looks like it goes back to some of Alan Strong's question. It actually looks like maybe we have a couple things here that are related. Do we have any native grasslands in Vermont? What is the difference between native grasslands and grasslands we have in Vermont? And then it would be helpful to understand the classification. So it looks like Alan has answered. From the National Agricultural Statistics Service, the Champlain Valley supports a very large amount. I'm going to actually read the number in acres here because I don't think any of us work in hectares. 360,000 acres of managed grassland, and some of that is in New York. So it looks like just a general understanding of more about grasslands. So I'm going to skip, Daniel, your question for a second, just because I'm following the grassland piece here. So Alan then said there's a lot of evidence in the Northeast supported native grasslands historically, but the vast majority are now managed for agriculture, primarily dairy. So, and then Sandy's asking again about what is the difference between different classifications of grasslands. So I guess maybe Alan, I don't know. I'm sorry, Alan, it's hard to follow the chat sometimes. Do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, Sandy, I'd be happy to talk to you about this offline as well. I mean, basically, you know, most of our agricultural industry is kind of based on cool season grasses, which most of them are non-native, and the warm season grasses are actually our native grasses. It seems like, I mean, we do have native grasses in Vermont. We just don't have them in extensive acreages. The issue, I mean, you know, this gets into the conservation piece, is that a lot of these endangered and threatened bird species that we are really concerned about with grassland conservation are in the Northeast, because we basically have turned the entire, you know, Great Plains, the tall grass prairies of the Great Plains into row crops. And so now we have, you know, viable populations of a lot of these declining species in the Northeast, where they're actually doing, fairly well compared to other parts of the country.
Great, thanks, Alan. Okay, so I'm going to go back up to Daniel Seff's question with the timestamp 8:27. And Taylor, if you're still on, this question is actually directed towards you about the perception that South Burlington has absorbed a grossly disproportionate share of the region's development in the past, and kind of the rest of the question there. I don't know if you could address that, or if
I will address it the best I can. My answer will be a bit long-winded and probably will not satisfy the question answer or asker, but I'll try my best. The Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission has been tracking the number of new homes constructed in Chittenden County over the past 5 years as a part of the Building Better Homes Together campaign that CCRPC is a part of with Evernorth and CHT, Champlain Housing Trust. I can't quote those numbers off the top of my head, but certainly a lot of new housing starts have happened in South Burlington over the past 5 years, and the question of whether or not South Burlington has become home to a grossly disproportionate share of the region's development in the past, I think, is something that people have various opinions about. I think it's really about how you look at that issue, and how much you really care about political boundaries. Certainly, I think from my perspective, I work for a regional planning commission, and certainly we want to solve this problem regionally, and we want to not just look at housing development regionally, but we want to look at environmental protection regionally. South Burlington is one of the core communities of Chittenden County of the state of Vermont, has access to water, sewers, and public transit. There's a lot of reasons why housing development would occur in South Burlington over other parts of the county and of the state, frankly. So I think I'm going to leave that there, and I think people will have their own personal opinions about that question. In terms of what the RPC is doing to ensure that other area towns are not maintaining their open spaces at South Burlington's expense, I think it's important, one, to note that CCRPC does not have any authority over the regulations that municipalities adopt. CCRPC does provide regional approval to municipal plans if that's requested by the municipality, and there's a lot of financial reasons why a municipality would want regional approval of a town plan. But when it comes to the rules, that CCRPC does not have any regulatory authority. So, whatever South Burlington adopts here as a part of Article 10 and 12, we don't say okay or yes or no to. It's something that's fully under the municipality's jurisdiction. We certainly try to, when we're working with more rural municipalities, treat them as a client, just like we're treating South Burlington as a client right now, and try to help them meet their vision, and certainly help try to implement our own regional plan, which calls for at least 80% of new housing developed in the county to be in areas that are already developed, essentially, that we're concentrating more housing in areas that have infrastructure and not in rural areas, including rural areas of South Burlington. I think, that said, we also understand that some municipalities perhaps aren't putting as much thought into infrastructure and into planning for smart growth in their villages. Some are, and some aren't. But the reality is, besides the municipal plan, we have very little ability to coax a municipality into changing its rules. So with that, I'll open the floor, I guess, to Bernie's question, perhaps.
Mine's pretty simple, Taylor, really. The RPC, I know, has a ton of data on its website. So to get to the root of the question, does the RPC track kind of housing starts or housing development per town, where, you know, maybe there's a map that shows, you know, 1,000 in South Burlington and whatever in Milton, and is there such a map or a resource that somebody could be referred to that might get to the root of the question?
There is, Bernie, and I was trying to track it down on our website as I saw that question a second ago.
Yeah, I'm not sure you need to track it down now, but if it's available, maybe you know, we can, you know, put a link to it on our website or whatever. But
certainly,
you know, it's certainly an interesting question to ask. And if the data is available, we should certainly share that.
The data for the past 5 years is available, Bernie. Yes, and I can track it down and get you the appropriate link.
That sounds great, and I think that would build on these last couple comments here that provided kind of pieces of that information. I think that, you know, if you can get that, Taylor, that would be great, you know, with a source. Okay, any other comments or questions? This is the first of multiple opportunities, so if we don't get to something tonight, we can hear from you later. Great. Well, Taylor, thank you so much for being with us. This was really helpful. It was nice to have you available to help with the questions. Lonnie is asking, will UVM's comments be addressed? The answer is yes, but not tonight. Just that. And, you know, Lonnie, I think you said that you were going to provide something in writing as well, which might help us. So Sandy says, on what basis, from an ecological perspective, would one expect Bolton can contribute as much to new housing development as South Burlington? They don't have the same infrastructure services. And, you know, I think that's part of the information that Taylor has and comes into the ECOS plan and planning for the county. Okay, so I guess with that, thanks, Taylor, and you know, we can move on to our next agenda item, knowing we'll hear more as the process moves on. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll see you at the listening session next week, and I'll try to track down the answers to a couple questions that I received tonight.
Great, thanks so much.
Thanks.
Monica?
Yeah, can you just clarify to Lonnie's question, what, again, is that, what do you see happening here? Because her question was pretty specific. They do have a lot of land in what is the habitat blocks. Is it, should we expect something from UVM in terms of comments, since that's what we're gathering now specifically? I feel like we would be waiting for information from UVM. Is that correct? Or is UVM waiting for anything from us? I mean, we've put the map out there.
I guess that's a good question. I don't feel like I have a great understanding of what you need from us, Lonnie. I guess.
Okay. We will get you more questions, more specific questions.
Yeah, I think that might be helpful. And yeah. Because I think, you know, as written, UVM's lands wouldn't be treated any differently in respect to the habitat blocks than other properties. So, and Ted, it looks like you wanted to address that specifically.
Yeah, I mean, ever since I've been on the planning commission, we've been sort of awaiting UVM to give us an idea of what their plans are, and so maybe it's very timely that we have this, and Lonnie is prepared to get back with us what their plans are with the properties.
That's a different question, but it's still legitimate.
Yeah, Lanny, you had mentioned that you have a master plan, or UVM has a master plan of what it expects to do with its land. Maybe you shared that. You should get a good idea of what you want to do.
I'm not sure I heard everything that you said, but we have a campus master plan that's online. That's from 2006, and now we're updating it. So that's in process.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers. I don't think I heard you, Michael.
That's what I was referring to, which you had mentioned earlier. That's my goal plan. And if you shared that with the commission, then we'd have a better basis for discussion.
We have shared that, definitely.
But also, I mean, when Arrowwood did their study, to be clear, they weren't paying attention to who owned what land. They were specifically looking at resources. So certainly I would hope that UVM didn't think we were like targeting, UVM land. It was, Arrowwood had their scientific evaluation regardless of how things were zoned or who owned what, and that's what was looked at. So it would be interesting to hear what UVM's comment is specifically about that study, and therefore what those habitat blocks, what concerns there would be. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I think the university would totally welcome a discussion about that. So hopefully we can continue this discussion.
Great. Then I guess let's move on to the next item on the agenda. So the City Council is having a follow-up discussion kind of based on our joint meeting we had with them at their, well, I don't know if it's their next meeting for sure, but the meeting that is next Monday, May 3rd. And I know we had a lot of conversation that was across a lot of different topics, and from a conversation with Helen, and some kind of follow-up comments from the other city councilors, it felt like it would be helpful for them if we could kind of give them like a prompt for that follow-up conversation. So in your packet, I had drafted up with some help from Bernie and Paul, just like kind of a prompt for that conversation to kind of try to focus the city council's follow-up. And I know that in here there are a few things that are things that we've been kind of operating under but haven't had like a specific vote on. And I think Michael pointed out a few of those in some of his comments that he emailed around. So this is a draft. I would like to get something over to the city council to kind of help guide their discussion, just because they're, at this point they'd be going off of kind of the end of our joint meeting, which had many different topics discussed. So in here, I tried to kind of lay out some different options that we've been talking through, as well as you can see created a map kind of pointing out some of those kind of white areas on the map that we talked about would be the areas for development that would continue to have development potential. So I guess I can kind of open up for discussion. I don't know, Bernie, if you wanted to say anything else, since you would kind of help me get this together.
No, I don't really have anything to add. I mean, you and I kind of worked on it together, and so I think, you know, it kind of represents our thought as to what we wanted to send to the city council. So I guess, you know, what we're looking for is just comment from the rest of the commission to tweak what we've done.
Okay, Ted, you've got your hand up, and then Michael.
Well, I've wrestled with this as well, and I pinned down my choice, which would be to give the landowner the choice of a PUD or the other option. I'm sorry, of the TND and the PUD. Give them the choice.
Okay. And you know, the way this is, and just to be clear, the way this is written right now, it's kind of presented the different options, but has not weighed in on kind of a preferred thing that we're recommending. So if we as a group felt like Ted just said, there's one of these things that we would like to recommend, that is something we can add in here. So Michael, you were next.
Yes, I had a question about the map. The red line is intended to show the outline of the SEQ, but I think at the northern end, it's not correct. It's supposed to go up to I-89.
You mean include Meadowland?
Um,
And the hill farm over there?
yes. Yeah,
Okay, so,
yeah,
that's actually not part of the Southeast Quadrant zoning district. We have two different things we talk about as the Southeast Quadrant. One is kind of a general planning area, which does go up to 89. But the zoning area that Chapter 9 applies to actually doesn't include that area because that's the industrial open space zoning district.
okay, but then I must have been looking at some older document which defines the SEQ as being bounded in the north by I-89, in the south by Shelburne, in the east by, in the west by Spear Street.
Yeah, like I said, the planning area includes that, like the different things. But if you actually look at the zoning districts, the Southeast Quadrant zoning districts are don't include that area, like on the actual zoning map and Chapter 9. So, good point. Monica?
Yeah, there were two topics that are kind of big picture things for conversation. And one is, though you mentioned in relating to the circled area 4, and you call it the village, I guess it's just reiterating, you know, the plan has shown a village there for a long time. Is that still what everyone envisions? So I was reviewing some stuff a while ago with one of the counselors, and they didn't seem to be fully aware of the kind of density allowable that's already been on the map for a long time. So anything to kind of bring, not just should it be a TND or a conservation PUD, but the kind of density that the plan had intended there, you know, is that still, so some kind of question pertaining to that. The other is the overall language around conservation for PUD in perpetuity. What do we mean by conservation PUD, specifically of land that's not currently listed as a hazard or a level 1? And I know that the Affordable Housing Committee sent a document over, and they made an interesting, just to put it out there for conversation, that in something like a conservation PUD is adding a review of conservation every 25 years, and to find what kind of change would justify an allowable change within something that's conserved. So just, conservation in perpetuity, is that what people are interested in, or is it kind of a don't build on it now, perhaps don't build on it ever, but evaluate it, let future planning commissions, future city councils evaluate it every, say, 25 years with very specific criteria, because lands change, environment changes, something might grow, something might decrease. So
Ted and then Duncan.
Well, I understand what you're asking, Monica, but the reality is every year it could change, per the council. So, we could dial in anything, but it could be reversed. So I'm not even sure if it's even relevant. No.
Well, but the moment something is conserved in perpetuity, if it's perpetuity, that's right.
Oh.
That's
a different issue. But when you said
the one I'm talking about. Yeah, that's
okay.
the one I'm talking about. That if we have something called a conservation PUD,
right.
Are we all in agreement that it is in perpetuity conservation, or is it a 100-year lease, or what else that yes, the future somebody can change, but in perpetuity they can't. Yeah.
Okay.
I think Michael had his name, or Michael and then Duncan. Oh no, it was Duncan. I'm sorry.
Duncan first.
Oh, Duncan first. Yes, sorry.
Yeah, I had a question, and I remember we had a conversation about, I think Monica, you brought it up. With the conservation PUD, I see the 70%, but did we have a requirement that 70% of the property had to be covered by level 1, level 2 resources for it to be a conservation PUD?
It's in at 50% right now, I think. Right, Jessica? It's in at 50% in hazard and level 1. But it's still draft. I mean, it can change.
So I think we've had a discussion about this. Monica had a recommendation that kind of came from the housing committee discussion, but I believe that the last draft, and this is part of the choice, the idea that someone could choose to take their unencumbered land and choose the conservation PUD. So I don't think that we at this point had a requirement to have a certain level of protected, resource lands.
So I guess my follow-up is, how do we feel about that? And is that something we should ask the council about too? I mean, that's a pretty big delineation of, yes, you can do a conservation PUD on your land, whatever's on it, or no, it's got to be 70% or 50% level 1, level 2 resources.
Yeah, it is a good question, and we haven't to this point made that discussion, other than to say that is the approach. So that's under the choice of TND or conservation PUD, and it specifically says this is the approach the commission's been operating under. So at this, so far, with our draft, the landowner could make that choice regardless of.
Duncan's reminded me though, I did have a recommendation that was submitted to you guys in an agenda, I think, and it was saying as an initial start for conservation PUDs, they have to have 65% of their land in hazard and level 1 to qualify for the conservation PUD or something. Like, do we or don't we do that? So maybe it would be helpful just as a discussion piece to submit that, because if you did take, like, even within the SEQ, 2 lots, somebody has a microphone on that's making it really hard to hear. If you do take 2 lots within the SEQ, you can see, well, one person now has like 95% of their land in hazards and level 1. They need the conservation PUD. I mean, that's why we have to have it. But another lot down the road may have 0 hazards and 0 level 1s. Are we, having a visual like that might help in that conversation with the council? And are we comfortable with allowing the person who has no hazards and no level 1s to participate in the conservation PUD. So a visual might help the city council, because I do think that it's a good conversation. That should go to them, unless we have an opinion.
We could add some additional, I mean, I think that that's in here in that the choice would do that. You know, it would allow someone who could do a TND to choose to do a conservation PUD. You know, versus requiring a certain level. Like, do you think we need to add something else specific in here to clarify that?
Well, I think it's the second part of what you said. It's regardless of the TND. The question is, does the city council envision certain parts of the city only allowing a conservation PUD?
Yeah.
Are they aware that by doing that, there will be parcels that have 0 hazards and 0 level 1s, that they would be requiring a conservation yeah, so it's as long as they're clear on that. Yeah,
I think that that's clear in here. Like, it would be taking otherwise developable land and putting it towards the conservation to get to that 70%. Yeah, I think that that's in here. Anyone else? Michael, had you had your hand up? Just
No, I was just looking at the chat. There's a couple of things in the chat.
okay. So to the chat. So Roseanne, to protect something in perpetuity, you need a legal conservation easement. Just zoning it as conserved does not protect it forever. So that does get to the earlier point. And Andrew Chonick, wouldn't you include agriculture, grasslands, and shrublands in the acreage that could determine whether conservation PUD would be permitted or required? And that is yes. So we have added agriculture, grasslands, and shrublands to the list of resources that would make up the conserved portion of one of these PUDs.
and Jessica, I do think that that's going to be a good point to continue informing people that they may not see that term in Article 12, but they will see it in the conservation PUD. And if Articles 10 and 12 do proceed more quickly and are approved before the PUDs are, there will be potentially that little bit of a holding pattern on some, but that's the intention.
Okay. One thing that I noticed, and I'm going to make a change unless someone cares one way or the other, the map has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the little list has A, B, C, D, E. I was going to change them so it was all numbers, so it was more clearly linked.
And there was also that street.
Yeah. One of the notes here, let me put it on. I have the Word document in front of me, so I will track changes. And which note was it, Monica? Do you have it?
I can't find it. I'm looking at the ABCs now. Wait.
Numbers. So I went to number.
There. So it's number 5.
Yeah, it's
oh, there it's saying Spear and Dorset, and it's Spear and Swift.
Yeah. Okay, so I corrected that in the version I have. Michael?
Yes, and I think there's another error on just below the map, the second paragraph in the last sentence. It says IZ committee has the highest, it should be the IZ committee has, and cross out the word not.
Yes, okay, delete. I deleted the word not.
I have to go, I have something on at 9 o'clock for which I wait. How much longer are we going?
I think we're only going until people are okay with this. Was there anything else that people want to see changed? commissioners, and then I'll get Sarah or Michael, because I know you need to leave.
Yeah, and my tablet's down to 3%, so I might blink out here shortly too.
Well, let's go Michael, Bernie, and then Sarah, if that's okay, Sarah. Michael?
No, I'm done. That was my only question.
Okay, very good. Then Bernie, because you're down to less power.
Yeah, I had nothing. I was just letting you know that I might fizzle out here. That's all.
Okay, Sarah, you're up.
Okay, I can be wrong totally, and I haven't gotten out my other maps to double check this, but is B, or number 2 in that little short list, is that truly Jewett's property? Because he's between Dorset and Heinsberg.
I don't have ownership associated with my map. It says areas immediately east and south of Cider Mill 2, now called Edgewood.
Oh, right. Okay.
You might be
Okay.
looking at Michael's comments, who had put in some.
Right, you are. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll take it up with him then. I wanted to be sure I was looking at the right place.
Yes.
The map has it. So the map is right, in other words, right?
And I see Sandy, but I should acknowledge we did receive some comments from the Affordable Housing Committee. Those comments were adopted 6-0 by the Housing Committee, and they will be sent separately. I didn't think it was appropriate for us to forward on comments from another committee, so I'd corresponded with Chris about that. So those will go separate. And Sandy, do you want to go ahead?
This Affordable Housing Committee was particularly concerned with offering the option of having only conservation PUDs in the Southeast Quadrant, as in many respects not being consistent with the comprehensive plan. So is it your plan to submit these questions offering up that option?
I think unless others on the commission want to make a change, my intention with this was to lay out the options as options. And at this point, we haven't weighed in on what those are, other than to say the choice of T&D and conservation PUD is what we've been going with so far. So, I mean, if the group wants to make a recommendation, we can put a recommendation in here, but at this point we weren't making a recommendation.
Okay, I just want to ask if I'm reading it correctly. The way I read it, it gives 3 options: T&D PUD only, conservation PUD only. This is for the Southeast Quadrant, or both, either or the choice. Now maybe I'm reading it incorrectly. So that was the heart of what troubled the Affordable Housing Committee, was to offer up to say that the only PUD type you could have in the Southeast Quadrant would be the conservation PUD. I reiterate, we feel it will result in unintended consequences that are very much inconsistent with the comprehensive plan.
Jessica, before we lose Bernie, could we just do a straw poll? I know Michael left, so it's not in a vote, it's not anything permanent, but of those who are remaining, can we do a straw poll? Because that I do think would be helpful. Michael's still here. He's here. Can we do a straw poll just to see where we stand on that? Do we feel that maintaining the choice in the SEQ is the preferred route? Ted offered his comment at the beginning. Can we just all do a straw poll? Because then that would inform them of where we stand. It doesn't mean we don't bring it to them.
I mean, yeah, I mean, currently where we stand is what we've been going forward with so far, which is what suggested. We can do that. It looks like we have some other hands have popped up. Bernie?
Yeah, I was just going to say, so I'm happy with it the way it's written. The whole purpose of this was to ask the city council for a little bit of guidance back. And so, you know, what we're basically doing is presenting them with, these are the different ways you can approach it. You know, what do you think? And use that to inform, you know, where we head, as well as public comment on where we head with these things. But I didn't feel personally that we should eliminate any of the options at this point, since it's a question, it's not a directive.
Right. So Ted, did you?
Yeah, I mean, I think at least we should have a straw poll or a vote to let the city council know which way we're leaning. I mean, we're making the sausage, not them. And so what we, you know, I think that they would probably like to get our opinion of what we have a preference of, but maybe lay out the options. But just my opinion.
Sure. So I guess, well, I mean, Ted, you made the suggestion, and it's the way we've been operating so far, the choice. I'm seeing a lot of hands come up here.
On
choice.
Ted said choice.
Yeah, choice for sure.
Choice from Bernie, Monica, Duncan, Michael, choice. And Paul, do you like the idea of the choice?
I never know what to do about these junctions that we arrive at. You know, it's so ingrained in me to be opposed to any and all PUDs that I have to figure out how I'm going to participate in the discussion. You know?
I know, and we can spend some more time really getting comfortable with the idea. I know the current PUDs could put a bad taste in a lot of our mouths about it. So
it's hard for me until I have a little while to adjust.
Yeah.
And participate and understand things.
Right, Michael.
Yeah, even though the straw poll goes for the choice, we do need to ask the council about paragraph because that needs to be resolved as well.
Which paragraph?
You have both options available for a given parcel or parcels. That could lead to a lack of clarity in the community about what can be expected to be built and could lead to future debate and contention over this issue. That paragraph.
Okay, do you want that to not be there? I mean, that was...
Yes, I want it to be there. We just need to be aware that even though we've expressed a preference for the choice, we need to discuss that with the council.
Yeah, and I do think that, you know, if we went with one or the other, you know, I think they should be, or we'd need to consider how they align with the current zoning and expectations and comp plan map and things like that. So, because Monica, like you said, those areas 3 and 4 in the middle have a denser, they currently have a denser zoning because that's the village commercial and village residential. So those are currently zoned differently than some of the other areas on the map there. Okay, Paul?
The discussion Monica was having earlier about conservation easement, about a conservation PUD having a conservation easement. If there were such a vehicle as that, that would be a very different thing. If we were saying this is in perpetuity, it's a legal conservation easement, and that would be quite a thing, actually. So that's important to consider. Really important, I think.
Yeah. Okay, any other suggested changes or items on here?
So Jessica, would you, outside of this meeting, were you going to add some kind of comment about a discussion about how to define conservation? Or did you want to come up with, should we agree on that? And I'm fine with however you opt to word it. It just seems like something discussing how one would define conservation would be helpful.
You mean about what would make up the conserved portions? Like that they would include the...
No, is it conserved in perpetuity, or is it something else? Like when we say something is it's a conserved conservation PUD, is the land, that 70%, is it to be in perpetuity? Like what do we mean when we say conservation? And just so everyone is clear, what is the council's perception?
Yeah, and we have not defined that. So,
right. So just,
yeah. So yeah, so you want that as a separate question for the council? I mean, I kind of feel like that's something we need to work through, and it might be too nitty gritty of a question for them.
That's
I mean,
fine. If it comes up, letting them know that we'll get back to them. Okay.
Michael?
Yes, the word conservation, it means what Roseanne says it means. We shouldn't use it. If we're not talking about a real, true conservation, we should say it's conserved. It has legal connotation.
Paul Ingalls?
The council certainly understands a conservation easement because that's what they're grappling with right now with the property that's, what is that? The property that adjoins Wheeler or Wheeler itself. Do you know what I mean? That's the question that's before them right now that nobody has in the last 10 years. I think it's the land from JM Gulf, isn't it? That hasn't had a conservation easement and so isn't conserved in perpetuity. So yeah, they're grappling with that right now. That's the big issue right now, really. Has been for 10 years and nobody's addressed it.
Yeah, it's a good point. Michael and then Sandy.
Yeah, just to Paul's comment there, that the resolution to establish conservation and convey that conservation easement to a third party has been passed by the council. So
That has been, okay, yeah. That's a big deal.
In the works.
Yeah, that's the real thing.
Hey, Sandy?
Just for clarification, this is not my comment, but what the council's been dealing with is a conservation easement for Wheeler Nature Park. It flowed out of a vote relating to JM Golf, but it relates to our park. That's what they just passed the motion. My concern about the paragraph about the choice is that it's not balanced. And it sort of gives the impression that there's no way to address how you might deal with having a conservation PUD next to a TND PUD. And so, it's sort of like all you're getting is the negative side of the choice and nothing about the positive. So that I think that, sends sort of a confusing message to the council from my perspective.
Okay. Anything else or anything anyone wants to see changed other than those adding the straw poll, changing the numbers, and changing Dorset to Swift? Okay. Well, then Paul?
Rather be a yes than an abstain.
A yes. Okay. Very good. Then I will say 7. And it wasn't an official motion, so it will continue to call it a straw poll.
Okay.
Yeah. Very good. Well, this was really helpful. Was anything else on the agenda? That was it. Next thing is adjourning. Great. Well,
And we do have another meeting before the public hearing, right? I know we have our noon meeting next week, or May 4th, and then we'll have another regular meeting with a regular agenda and then the open. Okay.
yes,
Great.
we
Okay.
will.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Good night.
Good night.